Hello, my name is Melissa Holden, and last week my family and I went on a little bit of a field trip. We went to go see the replica of the tabernacle, which was in Kaysville, which is very close, Kaysville, Utah, which is very close to us. And while I was looking at everything, something became apparent to me. We take for granted that the best way to learn things is being told. And that's why I teach a lot with the things I say. But I start thinking, they didn't use, they didn't write things down. Uh, they don't have speeches. There was one speech, and I'm like, how do they even know what he says? But they have it preserved somehow. They probably got the gist of what he said. So the things that they taught were in the symbols because they were going through from one thing to another, and I was thinking, oh, that's just like this. And they were pointing out some of the obvious symbols, but I'm sure that every person there was getting lots of lessons. And one thing I told my children while we were there is I said, we now have scriptures for so many of these ideas, but I could point at each thing and tell you a scripture. Oh, that story tells you that, or this, that. And so, anyway, one thing leads to another, and I decided that I wanted to teach something, and how I was going to do it was I was going to create a story, because rather than telling how something is, I'm going to tell a story. And then if each of the ideas, if an idea, a certain thing touches your mind or heart at that time, then that's what you learn. In which case, I don't have to come out and learn. All I have to do is tell a story. Here's the story that I wrote this morning. Once upon a time, there was a mother who was cleaning up her home in anticipation for a very special guest. Her children were home for the summer, and in addition to organizing her home came the added responsibility of keeping the children from fighting with one another. Her children started discussing what they could make for their guests because they all wanted to do something special. That escalated into a full-blown fight. The children did, however, all agree that a special berry pie ought to be baked. But the arguments began because none of them knew how to get such a pie. None of them had money. They couldn't go to the store and buy one. None of them had a recipe or skill to bake one from scratch. So the mother stepped in to calm down the children and offer a solution. Her solution included going on a berry picking hike. Yeah, that gets everybody out of the house. Maybe they won't fight. Anyway. And they would be able to use a recipe which was certain to please. It was tried and true. But one child quickly pointed out that homemade things are seldom certain to please, because for one reason or another, due to some error like getting eggshells in it, some error is going to make it uncertain to please, and you can never be sure whether someone's going to get a long hair or something in there. Anyway. But then another child quickly pointed out that it's the thought that counts. Before this new fight began, the mother commanded her children quickly to get their shoes on so they could go get started on gathering the berries. Once all shoed up, the family went outside, but before they started off, they began to argue about which way they ought to go to find the best berries, because the best berries are what their guests needed. The children all shared their ideas, which they had gotten from various sources like YouTube or whatnot. But then excitedly, one child figured it out. They pulled out their cell phone, because if anyone knew what was best, it was Google. The mother saw what was happening and she interceded. But she didn't take the phone away or even discredit the idea. She suggested that although there was wisdom in what Google said, there was also wisdom in what the devil says. So they needed to be certain that their advice was from the right source. This calmed them down, and they wondered then, who should they consult? Their mother gathered them all together and explained how using Google was a lot like saying a prayer. But sometimes we don't need to pray about a thing, but instead we use our own abilities to find the truth. A discussion ensued. The family decided to pray before they left, but they didn't pray to where they should find the berries specifically. Off they left, choosing to follow their mother out into the heat of the day, until they wandered next to a stream, where they found large bushes laden with berries. But before the youngest child could reach out and grab a handful of berries, the mother shouted, "Wait! People are not the only ones who love berries. This was an ideal treat for any number of predators." The older boy taught the family all that he had learned about a certain water snake and how this was the ideal biome. Just then, a snake slithered through the bush to the ground, into the water, and down the stream. The younger children were all crying. So the mother and the older children comforted them. And when they were all settled down at last, they began to cautiously fill their baskets. Once filled, they all journeyed home together, only arguing a tiny bit about which way to go, believing themselves lost. However, their mother was not lost, and she led the way home. Everyone learned through that hike how important it was to have only one leader to follow, and that the leader knows the way. Once home, they picked out a recipe and baked the most delightfully smelling pie. Maybe change. I don't like the way that sounds. The most delightfully smelling. Oh well. Anxious for their guests to arrive, even the mother realized that she had not yet cleaned the house. But she did have children who loved her, and those children loved their guests enough to want to get the very best berries for them, so that they could make a gift that would be worthy of their guest. The end.